Well, this morning we had a very long reading from the Gospel of John, and we've been having those long readings from John throughout the last few weeks of Lent. We are getting the story of Jesus as we move toward Jerusalem, toward Holy Week. And in this particular passage of the raising of Lazarus, we have something going on that is sort of indicative of where we're headed with Holy Week. Because there is looming over Jesus now a cloud of danger. Right before this particular passage, he has been at the temple in Jerusalem and he's been teaching, and his teachings have been challenged, and there were even Pharisees who were ready to stone Jesus, and he had to slip away. So then he goes to Bethany, well, actually outside of Bethany, and waits for the right moment to go back to Jerusalem. And this story, it plays a part in that journey. Now there's a saying from John P. Grier, "You are only young once, but you can be immature forever." Now, I don't know the context that sparked that little witty comment, but it came to mind this week as I gathered with a couple dozen of my high school classmates as we celebrated one of our classmates receiving a UNL Alumni Masters Award, which was kind of a big deal. And our friend Stan Ferberg from Washington, D.C. came and received a very nice honor. And so we had a chance to get some of our old friends together. And since I had missed my 50-year reunion last June, I was really excited to see old friends. Now, among these friends, we have this shared history of attending high school together, and some of us even grade school. And we can be both the wise 70, 71-year-olds that we are chronologically, that we have become, and still we can revert to the warmth and playfulness of high school when we get together. Now, the honoree and his wife were visiting from Virginia, where he lives, and just recently retired from 30 years as the chief executive officer of Northern Virginia Electric Cooperative, which supplies electricity to communities in Washington, D.C., that whole metro area. His name is Stan Ferberg, and he and his wife Robin were talking about living near D.C., and they spoke of the awe that they feel when they drive from their Virginia home into the city to take part in various things, and how beautiful the nation's capital can be, driving in at twilight and seeing the lights on the Capitol, on the Kennedy Center, and the fountains out front, the Washington and Lincoln Memorials, and all the other buildings. They feel a certain sense of pride, and there's just a beauty about it that they said they never get tired of. I was saying how I've always wanted to go to DC, but never have gotten there yet. And they said, well, just come sometime. You can stay with us and we'll show you all around. It'll be wonderful. So you just call us anytime. It's an open invitation. Now, between good friends and family members, we often have that kind of closeness, don't we, where we just give each other a standing invitation for walking in the door and doing things together. And if there's a holiday where you're alone and don't want to be, just come on over. That standing invitation means that you have a special bond. Dr. Cheryl Vaso says that there is something about an invitation that makes us feel accepted and wanted, special and included. And having a standing invitation makes us feel even more accepted and wanted and special and included, because a standing invitation from someone means that we are always welcome and we are always invited to visit anytime. Now, the story this morning may not seem at the surface like an open standing invitation from God, but I would invite you to think about that possibility as we talk about this story. Our extended story about the death and raising of Lazarus speaks to intimate friendships between Jesus and the three sibling household of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Friendships that were forged during a time in Jesus' life that we don't really know about. We have no idea how they first got to know each other. Perhaps Lazarus and his sisters lived in Nazareth for a time. Maybe they were neighbors and played together as children. We don't know what Lazarus did for a living, so perhaps he was another craftsman like Jesus, who did carpentry and other work. Maybe they worked on some projects together and got to know each other. It's not clear how they first connected. We don't get to know that about them. But we do know that each time they appear in the Bible, they are named individually: Mary, Martha, Lazarus. And we are told that they were people that Jesus loved. And when Lazarus falls ill, the messenger from Mary and Martha that comes to inform him says that the one that you love is ill. In other words, your good friend is in trouble. And they assumed that he would come right away. But he doesn't. He waits 2 days. And we don't know exactly the distance that he was from Bethany, but apparently it was a fair amount of distance. And the delay meant that perhaps Lazarus had already passed by the time he got the message. Only Jesus knows. But by the time he reached Bethany, at a time of his choosing, Lazarus had been in the grave for 4 days. Now, in Jewish tradition, one's spirit huddles around the body, hovers around for about 3 days, and then on the 4th day takes flight. So the timing of the 4 days is significant. And as Martha says to Jesus when he asks to see where Lazarus has been laid, it's been 4 days. And Jesus says, well, let's open the tomb. And she goes, it's not going to be good. There is already a stench. He is already decaying. But Jesus has said words of comfort to both sisters. They have both greeted him with identical words. Jesus, if you had been here, Lazarus wouldn't have died. We have that kind of faith in you. We know what you can do. But he says the words to them that are on the cover of the bulletin. And this, I think, is our invitation from Jesus. When Jesus speaks with Martha and says that, Martha replies that she knows that her brother will rise at the resurrection, the proper time with all the other saints. Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? And she says, yes, I know who you are now. I know what you can do. I have faith in you. This phrase, I am the resurrection and the life, it sounds like it's almost a repetition, and it's close. But I think there's a little nuance there when Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. But then he goes on and says, everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. I think in that moment, he is broadening that invitation, not just to those who believe in him in this moment, but an invitation to everyone to come to believe so that you might have life too. That is the standing invitation that Jesus conveys to us from his Father God. There is no time that I am not accessible to you. You can drop by any time of your choosing. I will always be here and you are always welcome. That is the message that we receive from God. There is no situation that is too hopeless. There is no situation which I cannot heal. And to demonstrate that, we have this extraordinary story. Now we have other incidents of Jesus raising people from the dead, but they have just passed. But this is 4 days. This is a different diminishment of life. But Jesus goes to the tomb, opens the tomb, lifts his face to the heavens and says, God, thank you for always hearing me. And then he just calls out to Lazarus, Lazarus, come out. And the man who has been bound for burial emerges from the tomb. And there are people there to see it. Now Jesus has hid some of his healings and miracles and chosen carefully how he reveals himself. But now when danger is surrounding him, now when his hour is about to come, there is no holding back or hiding anything. The world needs to know. And what more could we show in the power of God than to raise a man in this state? People must have been astounded to see this. And I've wondered sometimes why this story is in the Gospel of John and not the other 3, because there are some stories that are in all 3 Gospels. I read a commentary that kind of gave a reasonable explanation, because I think John chronologically is the last to have been written. We know from Holly's reading that Jesus was not only a lightning rod for the Jewish authorities because of the things he was doing and the way he was drawing people away from them and toward him. They were jealous. But now they've heard of this miracle of Lazarus being raised, and they're ready to kill him off too. So perhaps the early gospel writers didn't include this story, although they must have heard of it. Perhaps because Lazarus was still alive when they were writing those first Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And that would make sense. They would protect him until his natural passing again. And another theory on this is that Peter is not mentioned in this particular story, and there's an indication that he is doing work someplace else at another location. And so he is a main source for the stories in Matthew and Mark and Luke. So it's possible that this story was not known by him. I think the first explanation is the more plausible one, that it was to protect Lazarus. It's again something we can speculate about and not ever know for sure, but that makes sense to me. Because who wouldn't tell this extraordinary story otherwise? But by the time John wrote his gospel, it was safe to do so and to include this magnificent story of God's power and God's love. So we have this intimacy between Jesus and Lazarus. This is his friend he is raising up. This is his beloved friends that he is restoring the integrity of their family. The temple leaders decide that Jesus has to die after this. Oh, they've been on the verge of it before, but now they are committed to putting him away, getting rid of his unpredictable behavior, because they're afraid that in the power struggle that they're feeling with Jesus already, that Rome's going to come down on them one way or another. And as Caiaphas, the high priest, says, isn't it better if we just lose one man and save our nation and our institution? What a man to sacrifice. But the good news, the God news, is that God has a plan, and even that evil cannot stand, because we know that Holy Week will come, and it won't be long, and we know that it will be awful. But we also know that the worst thing is not the last thing. Jesus' invitation to us all is, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and who believes in me will never die. What wonderful confidence we can have in that promise. What wonderful mercy and grace are available to us because of him. We have a standing invitation from our God, and we are always, always welcome to draw near to his throne of grace with confidence that our Father will want to help us in our time of need and welcome us in. Amen.